Lily Vance pulled her threadbare wool coat tighter, feeling the wind whip through the fabric as if it weren't there. It was her only coat, a charcoal grey piece she'd bought at a thrift store 3 years ago. The lining was frayed and the buttons were loose, but it was the only thing standing between her and the biting 15-degree cold. Lily was 24, working 2 jobs to keep her small apartment in Logan Square. Her boots, salt-stained and worn, crunched against the frozen slush. She was heading toward the Red Line station after a grueling shift at the diner. Her mind focused on a warm cup of tea and a few hours of sleep before her morning shift at the library. As she turned the corner near Michigan Avenue, she saw him. A man was slumped against the cold stone of a high-end department store's exterior. He wasn't like the usual regulars who stayed near the shelters. He looked utterly shattered. He wore a fine, tailored suit, dark navy, perhaps Italian wool, but it was torn at the shoulder and he had no overcoat. His face was a mask of pale exhaustion, his lips tinged with a terrifying shade of blue. He was shivering so violently that his teeth rattled audibly in the quiet, frozen night. "Sir?" Lily stopped, her own breath blooming in thick white clouds. "Sir, are you okay?" The man didn't look up. He seemed to be in a state of shock or advanced hypothermia. His hands, bare and red, were tucked under his armpits. Lily looked around. The street was nearly empty. The few pedestrians left were rushing toward warmth, eyes glued to the ground, ignoring the man in the expensive suit, as if he were just another piece of the urban landscape. "You're going to freeze," she whispered, a pang of empathy hitting her chest. She knew what it was like to have nothing, though she had never been this close to the edge. Without a second thought, Lily began to unbutton her coat. The moment the fabric left her shoulders, the Chicago wind sliced through her thin polyester blouse like a razor. She gasped, her skin erupting in goosebumps, but she didn't stop. She stepped closer and draped the heavy, warm wool over the man's shoulders. "Take this," she said, tucking the collar around his neck. "Please, I'm only a few blocks from the station. I'll be fine. You need it more." The man finally looked up. His eyes were a piercing, clouded grey. For a second he looked confused, as if he couldn't comprehend why a stranger would strip in the middle of a blizzard for him. He reached out, his fingers brushing the worn sleeve of her coat. I lost my—" His voice was a raspy whisper, failing him. "Don't talk," Lily said, her voice shaking from the sudden cold. "Just stay wrapped up. There's a 24-hour pharmacy a block down. Can you make it there if I help you?" He shook his head slowly, leaning back against the wall. He seemed to be clinging to the coat as if it were a life raft. Lily reached into her pocket and pulled out her last $10, her bus fare for the week, and tucked it into the pocket of the coat she had just given him. "Buy some coffee when you can move," she said, forcing a smile through chattering teeth. "My name is Lily. Everything is going to be all right." She didn't wait for a thank you. The cold was already starting to numb her fingers. She turned and ran toward the subway entrance, the wind howling behind her. She didn't know that the man she had just clothed was Julian Sterling, the chief financial officer of Sterling Global, a man whose net worth could buy the very street they were standing on, and a man who had just been mugged and left for dead by his own driver. The next morning, Lily woke up with a fever. Her chest felt heavy, and her throat was raw. The walk from the station to her apartment without a coat had taken its toll. She wrapped herself in a blanket, shivering, and looked at the empty peg by the door where her coat used to hang. "Stupid," she muttered to herself, though she didn't truly mean it. "Now how am I going to get to work?" She checked her bank account on her phone. $7.42, not even enough for a cheap jacket at the Salvation Army. She spent the day in bed, drifting in and out of sleep, dreaming of the man's grey eyes. He had looked so vulnerable despite the expensive suit. She wondered if he had made it to warmth, or if her coat had ended up in a trash can. Meanwhile, in a private suite at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, Julian Sterling was staring at the same charcoal grey coat. It sat on a sterile chair, looking out of place amidst the high-tech medical monitors and luxury bedding. His assistant Marcus stood by the door looking frantic. "Julian, the board is losing their minds. The news of the mugging hasn't leaked yet, but they need you for the merger meeting on Friday. Your driver has been caught, by the way. He thought he could leave you in an alley and disappear with your watch and the car." Julian wasn't listening. He was touching the frayed lining of the coat. "She gave it to me, Marcus. She didn't know who I was. I was a shivering wreck in a suit that cost more than her rent, and she took the clothes off her back for me. It's a nice story, sir, but the doctors say—" "It's not a story," Julian interrupted, his voice firming up. "She gave me her name, Lily. She gave me $10, Marcus. $10. It was tucked in the pocket." He looked out the window at the skyline he helped build. For years, Julian had lived in a world of numbers, margins, and cold calculations. He had become cynical, believing that everyone wanted something from him. But that girl, she had lost her coat in a Chicago winter for a stranger. "Find her," Julian ordered. "Sir, I want to know everything. Where she works, where she lives, and why she was out there at 11:20 p.m. without a car. And Marcus, get me the best winter coat money can buy. No, get 10, but first, find Lily Vance." Back in Logan Square, Lily forced herself out of bed. She had to go to the library shift. She threw on 3 layers of sweaters and a thin raincoat she used for the spring. It wasn't enough, but it would have to do. As she stepped out into the hallway, the chill hit her immediately. She felt a wave of dizziness and leaned against the wall. "Just make it through the day," she whispered to herself. "Just one day." She had no idea that a black SUV was already circling her block and that the man she had saved was no longer just a ghost of the night. The Chicago Public Library was one of the few places where Lily felt truly safe. It was warm, quiet, and filled with the scent of old paper. However, her fever was spiked, and by 3:30 p.m. she was struggling to shelve books in the economics section. She was reaching for a high shelf when a hand reached over her head and slid the heavy hardcover into place. "You look like you're about to faint," a deep, calm voice said. Lily spun around, nearly losing her balance. Standing there was a man in a perfectly tailored overcoat, camel hair, expensive and looking incredibly warm. He was tall, with dark hair swept back and a jawline that looked carved from granite. It took her a moment to recognize him. The grey eyes were the same, but the blue tint was gone, replaced by a sharp, intelligent intensity. "You!" she gasped, her voice cracking. "The man from Michigan Avenue." Julian Sterling looked at her, his gaze softening as he noticed her pale skin and the way she was shivering despite the indoor heating. "You're sick." "I'm fine," Lily lied, trying to regain her professional composure. I'm glad you're okay. I wasn't sure if you know." "You saved my life, Lily," Julian said. He reached out as if to touch her arm, but hesitated, respecting her space. "I was in shock. If you hadn't given me that coat, I would have stopped moving. The doctors said another hour in that wind and my heart would have failed." Lily felt a blush creep up her neck. Anyone would have done it. "No," Julian said firmly. "Hundreds of people walked past me. You were the only one who saw a human being instead of an inconvenience." He looked around the humble library. "I tried to return your coat and your $10 this morning, but I found out you were here." "You kept the $10? Lily laughed weakly. "I thought you'd use it for coffee." "I'm keeping that $10 bill framed," Julian said with a ghost of a smile. "But I think you're missing something." He signaled toward the entrance of the aisle. Marcus appeared, carrying a large, beautifully wrapped box from a boutique Lily recognized but could never dream of entering. "I can't accept gifts, sir," Lily said, stepping back. "It's against library policy and it's just not right." "It's not a gift," Julian countered. "It's a debt. And Julian Sterling always pays his debts." He opened the box. Inside was a coat made of the finest cashmere, lined with silk, in a deep forest green that would perfectly match Lily's eyes. It looked like it cost more than her entire year's salary. Lily stared at it, her heart racing. "I can't wear that. I live in Logan Square. I'll get mugged for a coat like that." Julian's expression turned serious. "Then I suppose I'll have to make sure you're protected. But Lily, look at me. You're burning up. You need a doctor and you need to go home." "I can't leave my shift," she whispered, the world starting to tilt. "I need the hours." Before she could say another word, her knees buckled. Julian moved with a grace she didn't expect, catching her before she hit the linoleum floor. He lifted her easily, his expensive coat pressing against her sweaters. "Marcus, clear the exit," Julian commanded. "We're taking her to my physician." As Lily drifted into unconsciousness, the last thing she felt was the warmth of a man who was no longer a stranger, and the scent of expensive sandalwood and rain. When Lily woke up, she wasn't in her cramped, drafty apartment. She was in a room that felt like a cloud. The sheets were Egyptian cotton, the air was perfectly climate-controlled, and a large window offered a breathtaking view of Lake Michigan, currently frozen into a jagged sheet of white and blue. She sat up quickly, gasping as a slight headache throbbed behind her eyes. An IV drip was attached to her hand. "Easy," a voice said from the corner. Julian was sitting in a leather armchair, a laptop on his knees. He looked different now, less like a victim, more like the titan of industry the newspapers described. He closed the laptop and walked over to her. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice sounding much clearer than it had at the library. "My home," Julian said. "I have a medical suite here. My private doctor treated you for exhaustion and a severe flu. You've been out for nearly 18 hours. Lily looked around the room. It was minimalist but screamed wealth. "I need to go. My boss, the diner. I'm going to lose my job." "You've already lost the diner job," Julian said calmly. Lily's heart sank. "What? Why would you say that so casually? That was my rent." "Because," Julian said, leaning against the edge of the bed, "I bought the diner. And then I closed it for renovations. The staff are all being paid a 3-month sabbatical at double their salary, including you." Lily stared at him, stunned. You bought a whole business just to... Why?" "Because you were working 80 hours a week and killing yourself," Julian said, his eyes darkening with a flash of anger, not at her, but at her circumstances. "I looked into your records, Lily. You graduated with honors in art history, but you're shelving books and flipping burgers to pay off your mother's medical debts." Lily felt exposed. "That's my life, Mr. Sterling. It's not your business to fix it." "It became my business when you saved me," he replied. "I spent my whole life thinking the world was a predatory place. My own driver, a man I'd employed for 5 years, was the one who hit me over the head and left me in that cold. He knew I had millions and he wanted a fraction of it. You had nothing and you gave me everything you had. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" He stood up and walked to the window. "I want to offer you a position, Lily, not out of charity, but because I need someone I can actually trust." "A position doing what?" "Sterling Global is launching a foundation for urban renewal and arts education. I need a director who understands the city, someone who hasn't forgotten what it's like to be cold. I want you to run it." Lily shook her head, overwhelmed. "I'm just a girl from the suburbs who likes old paintings. I don't know how to run a foundation." "I'll teach you," Julian said, turning back to her. "But first you're going to stay here until you're fully recovered. There is a wardrobe in the next room. It's filled with clothes that won't let the wind in. Use them." Lily looked at him, searching for a catch. "Why are you doing this, really? Is this some kind of game for rich people?" Julian walked back to the bed and reached into his pocket. He pulled out her old charcoal grey coat. It had been cleaned and mended, the buttons replaced with high-quality horn. "Because for the first time in 10 years, Julian whispered, "I wasn't lonely when I was wearing this. I want to know the person who made me feel that way." The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind for Lily. She moved from her tiny apartment into a guest suite in Julian's penthouse, not as a guest, she insisted, but as an employee in training. Julian was a demanding teacher, but a patient one. He showed her how to read balance sheets, how to negotiate with city contractors, and how to spot a lie from a mile away. But there was a tension between them that went beyond business. Every dinner they shared felt like a date, though neither dared to call it that. They talked about books, about the architecture of Chicago, and about the fear Julian felt the night he was mugged. "I thought I was dead," he confessed one night over wine. "I was looking at the lights of the cars passing by and thinking, this is it. I'm just a number that finally hit 0. And then a girl in a cheap coat showed up," Lily teased, though her eyes were soft. "And then an angel showed up," he corrected. However, the world of the ultra-wealthy wasn't all silk and champagne. Lily was introduced to the city's elite at the annual Sterling Global Gala. It was her debut as the head of the new foundation. She wore a stunning emerald silk gown, Her hair swept up, looking every bit the part of a powerful executive. But as she moved through the crowd, she felt the stings of judgment. "Is that the one?" she heard a woman whisper. "The waitress he picked up off the street? I heard she staged the whole thing. A damsel in distress act to catch a billionaire." Lily froze, her hand tightening on her glass. She felt a familiar coldness, not from the weather, but from the people. "Ignore them," Julian's voice whispered in her ear. He appeared at her side, his presence a warm shield. "They are intimidated by someone who has a soul. It's a foreign concept to them." Suddenly the crowd parted as a man approached. He was older, with a cruel, thin mouth. Arthur Sterling, Julian's uncle and the chairman of the board. "So this is the little charity case I've been hearing about," Arthur said, his voice loud enough to draw a circle of onlookers. "Tell me, Lily, does Julian know you've been sending money to a medical debt collection agency every week? Or is that just part of the scam, taking his money to pay off your family's failures?" The room went silent. Lily felt her face burn with shame. Her private struggle, her mother's legacy of illness and debt, was being weaponized against her in a room full of strangers. "Arthur, that's enough," Julian said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low growl. "No, Julian, the board deserves to know who is handling the foundation's funds," Arthur continued, smiling unpleasantly. "A girl who couldn't even afford a coat a month ago. It looks bad for the brand. It looks like a midlife crisis." Lily looked at Julian. He was furious, but she saw the pressure in his eyes. He was fighting a board that wanted him out, and she was the perfect target to hit him with. "I didn't take a cent from him for my debts," Lily said, her voice shaking but clear. "I paid those with the tips I earned while people like you looked right through me. And if you think a coat makes the person, Arthur, then you're even poorer than I was." She turned and walked out of the ballroom, the sound of her heels clicking against the marble floor the only noise in the stunned silence. Lily didn't go back to the penthouse. She went to the only place she could think of, the Navy Pier. It was deserted in the winter, the giant Ferris wheel a skeletal shadow against the black sky. She stood by the railing, the wind off Lake Michigan hitting her with a familiar, brutal force. She had left her new, expensive coat at the gala. She was only wearing her dress and a thin shawl she had grabbed from the cloakroom. "I should have stayed in the library," she sobbed, the cold air burning her lungs. "I don't belong there." "You're right. You don't belong there," a voice said. Julian was standing a few feet away. He wasn't wearing an overcoat either. He was in his tuxedo, shivering just as she was. "What are you doing here?" she asked, wiping her eyes. "You'll catch pneumonia." "Then we'll catch it together," Julian said, walking toward her. "I fired him, Lily, my uncle. I called an emergency board meeting on the spot and used my majority shares to strip him of his chairmanship. He's out." Lily gasped. "Julian, you can't do that. He's family. He's part of the company's history." "He insulted the woman who saved my life," Julian said, standing right in front of her. "He insulted the only person who has looked at me and seen Julian, not the CFO of Sterling Global. My family left me to navigate the corporate world alone since I was 20. You gave me your only coat when I was a nobody on a sidewalk." He took her hands in his. They were ice cold. "I don't care about the company if you're not in it, and I don't care about the money if I have to spend it with people like him." "I was so embarrassed," Lily whispered. "My mother. She worked so hard, but the bills just kept coming. I didn't want you to think I was using you." "I know you weren't," Julian said. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out something small. It was a folded piece of paper, the $10 bill. "I carry this everywhere now. It reminds me of what real value looks like." He pulled her into his arms, sheltering her from the wind. For a long time they just stood there, two people who had been frozen in different ways, finally finding a spark of warmth. "Let's go home," Julian said. "Real home. Not the penthouse. I have a cabin in Wisconsin. No board members, no gala, no suits, just us and a fireplace. But the foundation can wait a week. The city isn't going anywhere." As they walked back to the car, Lily realized that the modern fairy tale wasn't about the money or the silk dresses. It was about the fact that even in a city of millions, two souls could find each other in the dark, and that a single act of kindness could start a fire that even a Chicago winter couldn't put out. The cabin in Wisconsin was a sanctuary of cedar wood and glass, tucked away in a forest of pine trees, heavy with snow. For the first time in years, Lily didn't hear the hum of a refrigerator or the sirens of the city. There was only the crackle of the hearth and the occasional soft thud of snow falling from a branch. In the quiet, the masks they wore in Chicago began to slip away. Julian wasn't the CFO here. He wore flannel shirts and spent his mornings chopping wood, a physical labor that seemed to ground him. Lily spent her time in the small library Julian kept, reading about the history of the land. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Julian started talking about his childhood. "My parents were always traveling," he said, staring into the flames. "I was raised by nannies and tutors. I learned early on that people were investments. If you invested time in someone, you expected a return. My Uncle Arthur was my mentor. He taught me that emotions were liabilities." Lily reached out and took his hand. "That sounds incredibly lonely." "It was," Julian admitted. "That night on Michigan Avenue, it wasn't just the cold that was killing me. I had just found out Arthur was funneling money out of the company. When I confronted my driver to take me to the police, he turned on me. In that moment, I realized I had no one. Not a single person in the world would miss me if I disappeared into the snow." He looked at Lily, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "And then you appeared. You didn't know I was an investment. You just saw a shivering man." "I saw someone who looked the way I felt inside," Lily said softly. "Lost. I've spent my life trying to keep my head above water, Julian. I forgot how to just be." They stayed in the cabin for a week, healing the invisible wounds that the city had inflicted. But the world outside was still turning. On the 6th day, Julian's phone, which he had kept off, began to vibrate incessantly. It was Marcus. "Julian, you need to see the news," Marcus said, when Julian finally answered. "Arthur isn't going quietly. He's leaked a story to the press. He's claiming you've been mentally unstable since the mugging and that Lily is a con artist who drugged you. He's trying to freeze your assets and take control of the company through a legal injunction." Julian's face went pale, then hard as stone. The peace of the cabin was shattered. "We have to go back," Julian said, looking at Lily. "He's attacking you now. He's trying to destroy your reputation to get to me." "Let him try," Lily said, her voice filled with a newfound strength. "I survived Chicago with nothing but a thrift store coat. I'm not afraid of a man in a boardroom." The return to Chicago was like entering a war zone. The city that Lily once found merely indifferent had now turned predatory. As the black SUV navigated the slushy streets toward the Sterling Global headquarters, the flashing lights of news cameras reflected off the windows like strobe lights. Paparazzi were camped outside the building, braving the sub-zero temperatures not out of kindness, but for the chance to catch a glimpse of the gold-digging angel. Headlines screamed from every newsstand: "The billionaire and the beggar, love or larceny." And Sterling CFO's mental health questioned, "Is he fit to lead?" Arthur Sterling had played his hand with the precision of a master assassin. He hadn't just attacked Julian's leadership, he had systematically dismantled Lily's humanity in the eyes of the public. He had painted a picture of a vulnerable, traumatized man, a man broken by a mugging, being manipulated by a calculating stranger who saw a golden opportunity in a frozen alleyway. The low point came when Arthur surfaced a man named Gary, a former cook from the diner where Lily used to work. Gary, whom Lily had once rejected after months of uncomfortable advances, gave a televised interview. He leaned into the camera with a fake, pitying smile and said, "Lily? Yeah, she was always looking for the big score. She didn't want a job, she wanted a bank account. That coat thing, probably a staged performance. She's the best actress I know." Inside the sleek, glass-walled conference room of the Sterling building, the air was thick with tension. Julian sat at the head of the table, his knuckles white as he gripped his pen. He was furious, his protective instincts for Lily clashing with the cold reality of corporate law. Across from him, a phalanx of the city's most expensive lawyers shuffled papers. "We can sue for libel, Julian," the lead lawyer said, his voice devoid of emotion. "We can bury Gary and the tabloids in paperwork, but that takes years. The courts move at a glacial pace." In the meantime, the board of directors is meeting tomorrow morning. They are terrified of the instability Arthur is preaching. They will vote to remove you as CFO by noon. We don't have years, Lily said, her voice cutting through the legal jargon. She was sitting in the corner, her posture straight, her eyes calm despite the chaos outside. She looked at Julian, seeing the man who had been willing to burn his empire down to protect her. We don't need a courtroom, we need the truth. And we need to show them the one thing Arthur doesn't have. What's that? Julian asked, his gaze softening as he looked at her. Proof of character, she replied. Arthur thinks the world is made of transactions. He thinks everyone has a price. He can't conceive of a world where people help each other just because it's the right thing to do. We're going to show the board that my price was a $10 bill and a used coat. Lily didn't waste a second. She contacted Marcus, Julian's loyal assistant, and gave him a list of names. These weren't the names of CEOs or socialites. She asked him to find the invisible people she had encountered over the last 5 years in Chicago. She wanted the regular homeless men she had bought coffee for on rainy Tuesdays, the kids from the housing projects she had tutored for free at the neighborhood library, and the waitstaff from the diner who had seen her give her last tips to the busboys. The next morning, the atmosphere in the Sterling Global lobby was surreal. The security guards, usually accustomed to high-end suits and leather briefcases, stood aside in confusion. The lobby was filled with people who didn't belong there. There was Silas, an old man who usually lived under the bridge on 4th Street, now wearing the clean, pressed shirt Lily had bought him months ago for a job interview he was too nervous to attend. There was Sarah, a young mother with a toddler in tow, whom Lily had helped with childcare so she could finally finish her GED. They weren't there to protest with signs or shouts. They were there to testify. As the board of directors gathered in the grand hall, Arthur Sterling stood at the podium, a smug expression of triumph on his face. He began his closing argument, detailing Julian's erratic behavior and Lily's suspicious background. He was prepared to deliver his final blow when the doors at the back of the hall swung open. Julian walked in, but he didn't walk in with guards or lawyers. He was accompanied by Lily and a dozen citizens of Chicago. The board is concerned about brand integrity, Julian announced, his voice echoing through the vaulted ceiling, commanding the attention of every billionaire in the room. You think having a CFO who was saved by a common citizen is a weakness. You think compassion is a liability. I think it's our greatest strength. Our brand isn't just about margins. It's about the city we serve. He signaled to Marcus, and the monitors on the wall flickered to life. They didn't show financial charts. They played a series of short, raw video clips recorded in the lobby just minutes ago. Silas spoke about how Lily had sat with him in the rain when he was at his lowest, not giving him money but giving him dignity. Sarah spoke about how Lily's kindness was the only reason her child had a warm place to sleep that winter. This is the woman you're calling a con artist, Julian said, his voice vibrating with pride as he pointed to Lily. And this is the man, he turned his finger toward Arthur, who was now visibly sweating, who knew I was freezing to death on Michigan Avenue and spent that very night trying to change the digital access codes to the company's offshore accounts. The room went deathly silent. Julian threw a heavy leather folder onto the center of the table. I have the logs, Arthur. While I was in a hospital bed with hypothermia, you weren't calling the police or the doctors. You were trying to bypass my digital signature to move $40 million. My security team recovered every keystroke and the metadata from your home office. Arthur's face turned a sickly shade of gray. He tried to speak, but the words died in his throat. The tide had not just turned, it had become a tsunami. The fallout was swifter than anyone expected. The board's vote was not just a rejection of Arthur's motion, it was a unanimous mandate. Arthur Sterling was removed not just from the chairmanship, but from the company entirely, escorted out of the building by the very security team he once commanded. A criminal investigation into embezzlement and corporate fraud was launched within the hour. The scandal that was supposed to destroy Julian and Lily's reputation instead became a national story of inspiration. The press, which had been so quick to judge, now hailed Lily as the heart of Chicago. The Thread of Kindness became the unofficial name for the new foundation they launched, and suddenly the city's elite were clamoring to donate, hoping to catch some of the light that Lily and Julian radiated. But for Lily, the victory felt hollow without one final private act of closure. The penthouse was filled with flowers, and the foundation's bank account was overflowing, but she needed to return to the source. A few days later, the brutal polar vortex finally broke. The sun came out, reflecting off the fresh Chicago snow in a brilliant, blinding white that made the city look like it was made of diamonds. The air was still crisp, but the lethal bite was gone. Lily sent Julian a simple text. "Meet me where the wind was the coldest. 6 p.m. When Julian arrived at the corner near Michigan Avenue, he found her standing by the same stone wall where he had nearly died. She was wearing the forest green cashmere coat he had bought her, a symbol of the new life they had built. She looked radiant, her cheeks flushed with the cold, but she held a small, humble bundle in her arms. "I have something for you," she said, her voice soft against the evening hum of the city. She handed him a box wrapped in simple brown paper. Inside was a new coat. It wasn't a designer piece from a boutique on the Mile. It was a sturdy, heavy and humble wool coat, dark charcoal grey, almost identical to the thrift store coat she had draped over his shoulders that fateful night, only this one was tailored to his size. "I wanted you to have something that wasn't bought with a corporate card or chosen by a stylist," she said, looking into his grey eyes. "Something that represents who we are when all the titles, the boardrooms and the bank accounts are gone. Just a man and a woman keeping each other warm." Julian put the coat on. It felt heavier and more significant than any of his $3,000 overcoats. It fit perfectly. He looked at her and laughed, a genuine, hearty sound that seemed to chase away the last of the winter chill from his soul. "I have something for you too," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He didn't take her back to the penthouse. Instead, he took her to the Sterling Global Foundation's new headquarters, a historic building in the South Side that had been beautifully restored. As they entered the lobby, Julian flipped a switch. On the main wall was a massive floor-to-ceiling mural. It wasn't a painting of him or the company's founders. It was a mosaic made of thousands of pieces of colored glass and thread. It depicted the Chicago skyline at night, but the buildings weren't made of steel. They were woven out of glowing threads of light. In the center, two figures were huddled together, sharing a single, simple cloak. "It's beautiful," Lily whispered, her hand covering her mouth. "It's our mission," Julian said, standing behind her. "We're going to make sure no one in this city has to be cold again, not physically and not emotionally. We're going to fund the shelters, the libraries, and the people that the world tries to make invisible." He turned her around to face him, his expression becoming solemn and vulnerable. "Lily, you saved my life in more ways than the doctors can count. You showed me that I was more than a number on a balance sheet. You gave me back my humanity when I didn't even know I'd lost it." He reached into his pocket, not for the $10 bill he now kept framed in his office, but for a small velvet box. He knelt on the polished floor of the lobby, the mural of the shared coat glowing behind him. "I know it's only been a few months, and the world thinks we're a whirlwind," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "But I've spent my whole life waiting for someone who would see me in the dark. I don't want to spend another winter, or another day, without you by my side. Not as an employee, and not as a charity case. As my wife, my partner, my equal." Lily felt tears pricking her eyes, blurring the lights of the lobby. The girl who had nothing but a threadbare coat and a heart full of hope was now standing in the center of a dream she never dared to have. "Yes," she breathed, the word a promise. "Yes, Julian, 1,000 times." As he slipped the diamond ring onto her finger, the doors of the foundation opened. A crowd of people had gathered outside the glass, the people from the lobby, the volunteers, the citizens of Chicago. They began to cheer, their voices rising like a symphony of warmth against the winter night. 1 year later. The Chicago winter had returned with its usual ferocity, the wind howling off the lake like a freight train. But this time, the city felt prepared. The Sterling Foundation Warmth Centers were now a permanent fixture in 20 neighborhoods, providing food, high-quality winter gear, and medical care to thousands of people who once had nowhere to go. Lily Sterling walked through the main hall of the flagship center on the west side. She greeted people by name, asking about their families and their jobs. She didn't wear her emerald cashmere coat today. She wore a simple, warm parka and sturdy boots. She wanted to be approachable, to be a living part of the community she had sworn to protect. Julian was there too. The man who once sat in high-back leather chairs was now standing behind a steam table, serving hot soup alongside the volunteers. He had stepped back from the day-to-day operations of Sterling Global, appointing Marcus as the new COO while he focused entirely on the foundation. He looked younger, the sharp, cynical lines around his eyes replaced by a permanent, gentle warmth. As the sun began to set, casting long golden-orange shadows over the snowy streets, they finished their shift and walked out onto Michigan Avenue together. They paused at the spot where it had all begun. A small, elegant bronze plaque had been installed there, flush with the sidewalk so it wouldn't be a hazard. It was polished daily by the foundation staff. It read, "On this spot, a stranger's coat changed the heart of a city. Kindness is the only wealth that grows when you give it away." "Do you ever miss it?" Julian asked, pulling Lily close to his side as the wind picked up. "The quiet? The life where no one knew your name and you didn't have 1,000 emails to answer?" "Sometimes," Lily admitted, leaning her head on his shoulder. "But then I remember that if I hadn't been in that diner, if I hadn't been walking to that station with holes in my shoes, I never would have found you. And I would have been cold my whole life, Julian, even if I had 1,000 silk coats. My soul would have stayed frozen." Julian kissed her forehead, the scent of the cold air and her perfume mixing in a way that always made him feel grounded. "We're going to the library tonight," he whispered. "I heard they finally acquired that first edition of the Italian Renaissance texts you wanted for the Foundation's gallery. I might have invested in a private viewing for us." Lily laughed, a bright, clear sound. "Always the CFO, Julian. Always making investments. Only for you, Lily. Only for the things that matter." They walked toward the sunset, their silhouettes blending into the busy, beautiful life of Chicago. They were no longer the billionaire and the waitress, the savior and the saved. They were simply two people who had learned the most important lesson of the human experience, that the strongest thread in the world isn't made of silk, gold, or influence. It is made of the simple, courageous choice to care for a stranger in the dark. As the first flakes of a new snow began to fall, dusting their shoulders in white, they didn't shiver. They were wrapped in a warmth that no polar vortex could ever touch, the warmth of a promise kept, a debt paid in love, and a charcoal grey coat that had travelled from a lonely sidewalk to the very centre of a beautiful shared life. The city of Chicago continued to hum around them, a massive symphony of millions of stories. But for Julian and Lily, the most important one had only just begun. It was a story that wouldn't be written in bank statements, but in the lives of the people they warmed, one coat at a time.